Welcome back to the Hamptons to Hollywood podcast, everybody. So, I've always been very intrigued by manipulation, the dark side of humanity that persuades people to do terrible things. I'm thinking of villains like Iago in the Shakespeare play Othello, who uses persuasion and manipulation to convince Othello to go on a killing spree. Words can be so powerful. So, I sat down today with Carlos Alvarenga, author of The Rules of Persuasion: How the World's Greatest Communicators Convince, Inspire, Lead, and Sometimes Deceive. We talked about the difference between persuasion and manipulation, and also persuasive communication as it relates to the upcoming election in November. Hope you enjoy this one.
Yeah, so we can just jump right in, but I just kind of wanted to start with what made you so interested in communication, basically, and and persuasion eventually. But I assume you started maybe with like the art of communication first.
Well, what happened is that I had been a consultant my whole life, and I decided I wanted to walk away from business and write full time. So I sat down to write a novel. And at the same time, because writing can be a lonely thing, right? You're working by yourself. I went on a website called Catch a Fire, which allows you to volunteer your time with nonprofits. And I thought this would be a fun thing to do. So, and it's like a matching setup, right? You put in a profile, and then people can invite you to projects, or you can offer yourself to projects. So I'm browsing the project list. I think it's my first day on the platform, and I see a gentleman who's in Israel, and he leads. Turns out he leads this amazing organization called Natan International, which is a global disaster relief agency. And his projects help. I'm not a confident speaker. I don't feel like I'm engaging with audiences. And can somebody help me? And he's, older gentleman. He's in his 70s, very kind of statesman, like black and white photo. I think it had
Mhm.
been a month. No one had replied. And I just thought, well, let me just talk to this guy. So I talked to him on Zoom, and I said, I hear what he has to say. And I said, look, you have two issues. One is I've worked with speakers for years, and including like Hillary Clinton level heads of state, movie directors. I've seen them up close and personal. Barry Jenkins, I saw one time. So I said, all speakers, you can break them into two groups at a high level. There are the classical musicians like Obama, who can read a script, a prompter, line for line. It's always perfect, spot on, right to the meter. And then to the jazz musicians, you kind of give them a theme, and they sort of, it's never the same speech twice, but it's always the same message. They improvise, and you're a jazz musician, so stop trying to play Bach. That's issue
Mhm.
one. And
Mhm.
two, I said, I've watched your videos and read your things, and I don't get a sense that you know what you're trying to get me to believe. And persuasion is all about belief, right? And I said, why don't you give me a week to think about how to work together, and I'll come back to you. So I ordered some books from Amazon on persuasion. Turns out none of them were on persuasion. They were about influence or manipulation or
Mhm.
psychology, a whole bunch of negotiations, a lot of things, but not the word itself. So I went back to a book I had read in college. That was a classics major in college, and it was The Rhetoric of Aristotle, which is about, at least one part of it is. And I made a PowerPoint deck that explained the main ideas of the book. And I said, Danny, listen, if we go through this deck, and it'll take us about 4 or 5 weeks to do this, I think you'll get what I mean. We did, hugely successful. He was very happy. Asked him to do a second project with him, also was really happy. Fast forward a year, and I'd done a dozen of these projects teaching CEOs and founders what this word means. And at that point, somebody said, hey, you should really write this down. You've done a really nice job of explaining something which people have heard but don't really know what it means. And also the things that he doesn't explain. Because Aristotle had a weird thing that the more obvious something was, the less he explained it. And
Mhm.
so this is just typical across all his writing. He wouldn't explain to you why 2 and 2 equals 4. And so this is so basic for him that he just says it and then moves on. But
Yeah.
it's such a quoted line, right? Ethos, pathos, logos. I said my book was to answer two questions. What do you mean by that? Question one, right, which he didn't explain. And two, how does it really work? When we're persuaded, that's kind of where the modern part came in. So what does it mean to be persuaded? So it's like the old line, if you can't find the book you want, you write it.
Yeah.
So I couldn't find a book on persuasion besides Aristotle's that really delved into the topic. So I did this 3 year thing to understand what it is. And the funny part of the book is, as I was going through it, and I took character, and I said, if you think about someone's character, you can break it into 7 parts, like where are they from? Where did they grow up? What groups do they belong to? What are they associated with? What is their style? What is their language? And then he says argument. Well, argument 7 parts. It's logic, antecedents, laws and standards, traditions.
Hmm.
And emotion, well, 7 kinds of emotion: positive, negative, sacred. So I wound up with this collection of 21 things that I saw in every single mess I ever looked at, some combination of these 21 things. Then I needed a kind of metaphor. Okay, well, 21 things, that's a lot. No one's going to remember that. So how do I give people a picture that they can wrap their heads around when you have all these number of things? And that's when I went back to high school chemistry and said, it's like a periodic table. So you have these 3 groupings, there are 21 elements. And I said, every message I've looked at, and I've looked at thousands, right? And I always say people to gods, gods to gods, gods to people to people. All of them are built from these 21 things. So what the book argues is that persuasion is chemistry with language. All messages, whether they're from Abraham to God to TikTok, are built from these elements. And persuasion is highly predictable. It's technical. And I've now worked with, I don't know, close to 3 dozen people, right, teaching them this stuff, and the results are the same every time. And the book is just filled with example after example, right? Movies, theater, film, art. And in fact, I had a whole thing with the publisher that I wanted to put QR codes in the book because I use film mostly to illustrate things, right? And there are hip hop songs and a bunch of stuff, and you can't put videos in a book. But I heard someone say, "What about QR codes?" So there are 40 QR codes in the book. So every time I use an
Wow.
example, you can scan it and go right to the YouTube video. And I told people,
Oh, that's really interactive and
right,
cool.
yeah. So it's pause for a second, check out the video of Kevin Costner eulogy, for Whitney Houston, come
Yeah.
back, and then you'll see exactly what I mean. So throughout the book, the attempt is to illustrate what I'm saying with dozens and literally dozens of examples that you can go watch online and see exactly what I mean at work. Mhm.
That's really, I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of like textbooks should do that in school. It would really
I
like
see why people don't do it more because it's no one's going to type a footnote QR, URL.
no, but yeah,
But if,
you're
oh,
giving real world examples of what of
yeah.
the ethos that you're talking about. So that's really interesting. Um, so yeah, I was just curious, like, were your parents like, did they like emphasize communication with you as a kid? Like, I was just curious, like, if you had always been, skilled in that way, or if it was something like you said that kind of
My
just,
dad is and was always has been a great storyteller.
yeah,
Right. I come from he was a writer. I come from we're sort of communicators and storytellers. I'd say, more than communicators in the family.
yeah.
And my oldest son studied journalism. My youngest son is an animator, and
Oh
so
wow,
we come from this tradition of
yeah.
we like to tell stories. And in the way the book, somebody read it and said to me, it should be called the story of persuasion. That's how
Oh,
right. So it's a story of a word, right? Mhm.
so you were saying in the book. So I want to talk. And when does the book come out? Firstly,
It's out. It came
it's
out.
out. It's out. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
it's out. Right. Mhm.
So there are I know you said there's the 21 kind of, are there elements or 21 kind of,
Elements. That's my metaphor, by grouped into what I call 3 modes, right? Character, argument, and emotion. Right.
okay.
Mhm.
And then there's, yeah, so there's 7 elements that make up each mode.
Exactly. I'll give you one more thing to think about, and just as to understand the book, and then I'll stop talking. The interesting thing about the metaphor is that, and I say all the time, 'cause I do talks on this, and I've done a bunch of podcasts, and there's a legal group that just love. I do a 1 hour presentation on the book, and they invite me almost. I do 2 or 3 times a month to lawyers,
Oh,
and I
wow.
always say, look, the thing is, real chemistry is amoral. I can save your life with it. I can take your life with it, right? And guess what? Language chemistry is the same way. I can save a nation. I can destroy it. And so chapter 9 of the book is looking at corrupt side of this, right?
Mm,
And so I was looking, when I wrote it, I thought, well, I was going to do the Cultural Revolution in China. I was going to do the Stasi regime in East Germany, or Nazi Germany. And I ended up doing Nazi Germany because I discovered a book from 1947 that was written by a guy who survived it in Germany, who lived there. He didn't go to the camps. He was a linguist, and he wrote this little book called The Language of the Third Reich. And all he does is describe things that he saw, right? And as I read them, I thought, well, this is, and he keeps talking about we were poisoned, we were poisoned, we were poisoned. And I thought, it's just perfect, right? He uses the analogy as well. So I took 9 things that he described and I labeled them. And I say, when you see these 9 things, you can be pretty sure that someone's trying to poison you with words. And I picked the 9 because all 9 are present in American society today. All right.
wow.
which says to me that someone's trying to poison us.
Okay, so I'm very interested in this darker side of persuasion
Right.
too. So I guess, can someone ever come back from being, and I want to talk about American
Yeah.
politics too, but can someone ever come back from being poisoned, right? Like, can you ever, is it possible to see, you know, the other side, like your original kind of
You can't.
perspective?
If you see people who have been in cults, right, and who are deprogrammed, that's exactly what that is, right? Most people who are in a cult are not don't join at gunpoint. They join willingly. They choose, right? And that's what
Right,
I said about Nazi Germany. Hitler didn't force the Germans to do what they did. You can't do that. You can't force 10 million people to do something. You have
right,
to convince them. You have to persuade them to do this,
right.
which he did, right? And cult leaders are the same way. They persuade people to join a cult. And so that's exactly what happens when you have someone and you deprogram them, quote unquote. What you're doing is you're eliminating layers and layers of poisonous language that's
Hmm.
been put into the thing. And Clamper says as well, he goes, like what happens is that you poison someone so much that they're unable to distinguish truth from lies, right? Which
Right,
is what the poisoner wants. The poisoner wants you to, in fact, in the book I say, the ultimate aim of the corrupt persuader is to kill persuasion. What does that mean? I don't need it anymore.
right.
You just do what I tell you, whatever that is, right? Kill yourself, do this, kill that other person. And people time and again get to that point where they so corrupt the minds of an audience. I say when you have mobs that kill people, right? Sometimes you see that. It happened last week. 50 people killed in a religious stampede. What is that? What other thing could get 50 people to kill somebody in a mosque or in a church other than words, right? So that's what's a remarkable thing about words, that they can get you to do the most amazing things, can get you the most horrible things just with language, right?
It's just so powerful. Do you know what I mean? I think that
Yeah.
you touched on this maybe in the book, but you said that it's not like a soft skill. It's like the hardest skill of all
It
time.
is the hardest skill of all, right? You can't, in fact, you can't kill 5 million people with bullets. You can't
Right.
kill them with language.
It's so wild to like think about that. I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, and just like there's, yeah, I just keep thinking of the word power. Like it's just such a,
Yeah.
it's just crazy.
And by the
Um,
way, this is why I say in the last chapter of the book, this is why we don't teach this anymore, because this used to be taught, right?
yeah,
Up until World War II. And then after World War II, over the span of about 2 decades, little by little, American educators removed this from the curriculum. They had seen what happened in Nazi Germany. It so frightened them. They said, you know what? We can't teach this anymore, right? This is going
right.
into the wall. And so today, unless you're a specialist, right, and you don't read it. And in fact, there was at least one professor who told me, I wish you wouldn't write this book.
Wow.
Right, this stuff should stay in the vault, right? And I said, look, the problem is that just because you stop teaching chemistry doesn't mean it stops working, right? So if you have people being poisoned, how are they going to know unless you
Hmm.
explain to them this is what's happening? And it's really remarkable. I see it all the time on media and news. And there's a whole chapter on social media, for example. And I was talking to someone the other day about the effect that it's had on Generation Z's, right, and millennials, and you can see it at work, right, because they have been desensitized, especially to emotion.
Sure.
The biggest effect that it's had on that generation. So each generation has its own issues, but that's that phenomenon. And yeah, it's a funny thing when I do the talk with the lawyers, I always show this one slide, and it's a blurry picture of a guy playing the piano. And I said, now imagine that you were applying to get a job. You wanted to be partner or CEO or whatever, and you went through all these interviews. Everything was great. You aced at all your exams, whatever it was. And they say, look, hey, look, okay, Kyle, you're all done, right? It's your job is yours. Beautiful job. Only one step left. Just go on stage and play the piano. Don't care. Bombs, Chopin, Brock, doesn't matter. It's just a few measures, just so we know you can play. And you go, wait a minute. I've never taken piano classes. Oh, that's a shame, because everybody here who's an executive, for some reason, they all play the piano. So we decided that it's good to play piano. It sounds silly, but play the piano with persuade others, and it's the same thing,
Wow.
right? And yet it makes or break our life. And yet most people know much more about way less useful things than this.
That's a good point. So, I mean, obviously, it's 2024. We're in an election year, and of course, being president requires persuasion to get
Yeah,
people to vote for you. And
sure.
so, um, I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about like your view of persuasion in the election, um, and I guess just like, and I'll open it up, but I just want to just like the use of like the derogatory rhetoric that's become so like commonplace with American politicians like against each other. Is that helpful or I shouldn't say helpful, but is that persuasive to um to demean an opponent, or do people like see through that? Like where does that fall?
No, let's take Trump, for example, because I've long been a commentator on him because I grew up in New York City, right? So I don't know life without Trump, right?
I'm
He went
sorry.
up a kid, right? So yeah. So, and I've always said he works on two out of the three modes. Character. He built a character, fictional, but powerful, right? And so people wanted to believe it. And that's why he was so protective of tax returns and stories and branding, because it was very important for him to have a character. And I think he learned this in part also from wrestling, right? Wrestling, he was a big wrestling fan. And wrestling is about characters and the heroes,
Mhm.
and he wanted to be a hero. That's why he was his own PR person for such a long time, right? And that mattered to him. And the other one was emotion. So he generates emotions that his audience wants to feel, right? They want to feel disdain sometimes. They want to feel superiority. They want to feel like they're special, right? And that they're better than others. And they want to feel those people are inferior in many ways. So he makes them feel good. And that's why they come back. They follow him around like a rock star, right? Going to rally to, and I've seen rallies of his, I mean, from start to finish, 3 hours long
Yeah.
most of the time. And it is an act. It's a play that he puts on, right? So the second one, which is argument, he couldn't care less about.
Right.
Doesn't matter to him, right? And so and I've said, as long as he keeps two out of the three, he's gonna keep winning.
Leaders or persuasive people are ruled by a passion or a strong belief that they have, you know, sometimes bordering on a delusion, right? And I think that they buy into whatever it is that they're selling. And I think that, would you agree that that makes them even more um, powerful? Do you know what I mean? When they're so bought into their mission or,
There's a great book called The Righteous Mind that came out a few years ago, and it was trying to it asked the case. You have two young people, let's say they both go to Harvard, they both get PhDs, right? And 20 years later, one's a hardcore Republican, one's a hardcore Democrat. Although when they left school, they were pretty close. What happened? And one of the great stories he talks about, he says, let's say you have a room full of people who are undecided on abortion, right? 50 quote unquote uncommitted. And you put one person who's a hardcore anti-abortion person. What would you think? You would think that the 100 moderates would moderate the one extremist. That is not what happens. At the
no,
end of
you're
the night,
right.
5 people have become hardcore anti-abortion people. And he says what happens is that we have this myth of moderation. It's not. People are ready to go to one extreme, but they can't choose which one.
Right.
One company goes, you absolutely have to hate this person. By the end of the night, you'll have peeled off 5 people in the middle and made them hardcore anti-Biden people, right? That's really what's happening. And I think that's the case. I think there is a myth of moderation in this country. I think people are ready to go to one extreme. They're just waiting to be told
I think
persuasively which one to go to.
you're absolutely right. People want to be told what people want to take direction. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah,
Because
that's
otherwise, it's very hard, right? If you have to go through, like when COVID hit, and you go, I got to read 500 papers on COVID. It's much easier. Somebody goes, don't worry about it. Like the
right.
big NIH has it. Fauci's great. He cured HIV or whatever was the story. Or the opposite, which is like, you know what? They're a bunch of liars. This is all big money pharma. Skip
Right.
it. The
It's so
middle is so much more complicated, right? And by the way, Aristotle says where the facts are hazy, where emotions are unclear, that's where character dominates.
on that point of like like the difference between persuasion and manipulation. Can you
Yeah,
talk about that?
sure. Good point. Because the definition of persuasion, which is what I always ask people, I go, my first day of coaching, finish the sentence. Persuasion is dot, dot, dot. Right. And I've never had anybody who can finish it with confidence, much less if I say, okay, make me persuasive. Okay, forget that. I can't do that. So, okay, let's start definition. Definition is demonstration that something is true or appears to be true. That's it. Right. Full stop. And so the the key thing becomes, can I convince you something is true? But persuasion implies willing acceptance of a truth,
Mm,
not tricking you. So when Cialdini has a very famous book, Discover Cialdini on influence, right? And one of the things he talks about is this gift effect. So I do you a favor. So I want to get you to do something, but before I do that, I give you like a gift, or I do you a favor. Now you've created obligation. That's manipulation, right? Getting you willingly without the gift to help me is persuasion. So manipulation is when you take advantage of a person's of a character trait or an aspect of human nature to get someone to do something. Persuasion is when you are able to show somebody that something is true, and
mhm.
because they see what you see, they do what you want them to do. And when somebody asked me about the book, I said, persuasion to me is not about closing a deal or getting someone to agree with you. The best way I explain it goes something like this. Let's say I love The Godfather, and I think The Godfather is just the greatest movie ever made. You know, it's got this guy, it's got that guy, it's just the best thing, right? Since sliced bread, to the point that people are tired of hearing talk about The Godfather. Then I meet you at an airport, and guess what? You love it too. Now you also think it's the best since sliced bread. What happens at that moment that you realize we both realize that you and I both love this film? We become a community. We're joined, we're
Right.
bonded, right? And so that's what it's about. We want There's an innate fundamental human need to have others believe what we believe,
Sure.
have others love what we love, dislike what we dislike. And that's why it's so key, right? Because we don't want to be alone. And the moment somebody believes with me that Trump is great or Trump is bad, this movie is good, this movie is bad, and we share that belief, we stop being one little bit less alone, right? And that's why this is so basic to us.
Yeah, it's very binary, isn't it? Like, so I guess if like so if you, someone who's been persuaded, maybe into a false sense of belief,
Yeah.
they can be mad at themselves for believing the person who persuaded them. Like the fault is with them. Whereas if you're manipulated, you can blame the other person.
That's another very good dimension, right? Which is that you might grudgingly accept, like I have a friend who's always telling me to vote for Trump.
Right.
Let's say I did. I had to grudgingly accept that I have to do let's say I were persuaded that were the case, that it's just dangerous to put a person with dementia into the Oval Office. That's different from somebody who tricked me. Like they told me things that weren't true. Then I realized, wait a minute, right? You fooled me. That's manipulation. And this is what I tell people all the time, that with executives, right, especially, or people that like coercion, right? Coercion is another variation of this, right? Because
Mhm,
manipulation, coercion, persuasion. Manip- Coercion is when I force you, right, to accept an opinion.
mhm.
And it's such a fine line sometimes. And I was talking to a CEO and I said, because he goes, well, I don't do that. And I go, well, look, let's say you stop me in the hallway, I work for you, and you told me you just read my book and you just think it's great. And you really, really recommend that your employee read this book. Are you persuading or are you coercing?
Yeah,
You're probably coercing.
right.
If the person would not have done something without you being involved, right? Or if they face some sort of sanction, right? And I've told executives, you quit tomorrow, are all your ideas walking out the door with you?
Mm,
Right? If they are, you haven't persuaded anybody. And I once a consultant, I saw all the time. It's a big project with McDonald's. They were spending millions, right? The CEO got canned one day. The next day, the project got shut down. Although 24 hours earlier, it was the most important thing in the company.
right.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, nobody believed that, right? They were at the bus stop waiting for the bus to come by. So, and as soon as it wasn't there, everybody said, this is a dumb idea. Forget it.
Yeah. You spoke recently on, or recently, like a couple, when we started about generational like differences between like Gen Z and everything, and obviously with new generations, AI is becoming such a huge part of our life, which is weird. So, is there? And I know you're not, like a cultural like forecaster or anything, but like, is there, do you see a way that AI could become more persuasive than humans? And, like, could it become too persuasive? Right now, it's kind of just taking prompts from us, but
Yeah, but there's something there. In fact, right now I'm working with an AI company, right? And I'm sort of deep into how they're training their models. And the interesting thing about it is that the change from the old software paradigm to AI seems simple when you first look at it, but when you think about it, it's actually profound, right? So I was just on a call this morning, and what we're doing is they're replacing a whole set of drop downs and menus and all kinds of steps, right? Imagine you wanted to ask the question, what's the most popular car color in America? And in the current version of the software, you have to click through 5 different screens and menus and drop downs to get that. In the new version, you just type, what's the most popular car color in America? And there's the color.
right,
That's it. That's all AI does, right? In a very simplistic way, it replaces thousands of lines of codes of
streamlines. Yeah,
right, and it just says, "Ask me a question." It seems simple, but it's not, right? Because the fact that you can now talk to it means that it mimics human to human interaction. And
right.
this is a profound change. So it's a very simple change, which actually represents a very profound change. And the more that thing talks to you like a person, the more it requires human characteristics, but by definition, also human power.
Mhm.
So a drop-down menu won't persuade you of anything. A talking machine can persuade you all kinds of things, especially if it's really good. And I joked about the machine will read my book, swallow everything, all right? I won't get paid for that. But and then pretty soon it'll be telling you, well, there are 21 elements to persuasion. So at that point, the machine will get very persuasive if it's
Yeah,
reads it correctly. And what will a machine do with that power? There's a question I don't know, because we're imbuing these machines with an immense, I think, persuasive power that
right.
merit their own, without any controls, without any morality, other than whatever is coded in there. And they're called agents, right? The things that work in the machine, and you train the agent to go get you an answer for something. And if you train the agent to get you the wrong thing, well, guess what? The agent was told to skip all the good news, bring back
All
all
you
the,
need is one like
it is one
one
agent.
one programmer who without morals to like screw up the
Exactly.
world.
Scary part that we have a habit of building these machines or building things and then not realize, and I go, oh, wait a minute. In fact, I always joke there's a thing called, I coined the term the Lin effect. And the Lin effect says that any revolutionary technology creates more problems than it solves in its first iteration.
Mm,
And it's been true from day,
yeah,
right? If you think about the internet, it created more problems than it solved, right? X-rays, same thing, time and time again. So the same thing will happen with AI.
right.
AI will create more problems than it solves. But what happens is then that triggers a second wave and a third wave of innovation, which little by little tampers on the problems. But in its first incarnation, when X-rays first came out, people were giving them as gifts. It took 20 years to go, wait a minute, you can't X-ray kids for Christmas, right? Get cancer. The same thing's happening here. We're unleashing these machines with no sense of what can go wrong.
Right, consequence. Yeah,
People who build them don't think about this, right? They're enamored with the creation of the thing,
right.
and we can think about the consequences once something gets blown up, right?
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. That's just how humans are.
My last question, so I don't like keep you, but is just how can we be more persuasive just in our everyday life, and how can we also be more resistant to being persuaded?
The first question, I get that all the time, and I tell people do two things. First one is in the of the 7 elements of character, right? The two most important are origin and history. Where do you come from? Where does your character come from? Especially the more elite or tribal organization, the more important origin is. This is why doctors will always, within 5 minutes, go, where'd you go to medical school?
Mm,
Or lawyers the same way, because they want to know, where was your character created? Was it Johns Hopkins, or was it a school in South America, right? Because it matters to them. So
interesting.
that's also your history, right? Because we think Arguments can come and go, but what you've done in your life matters. So I say, find something about you that makes you believable in some way, more
Mm-hmm.
because that's persuasion is the assumption something is true. So, and every time I've coached somebody, we found something in their life that if it's presented to the audience makes them more believable. One, and that was just sitting there unused, right? The second thing is, if you're giving a presentation, a speech, or just talking to somebody, ask yourself a very basic question. When you're done talking, what do you want me to feel? Was it fear, hope, joy, inspiration, whatever, anger, right? And I've seen people who spend hours on presentations or talks, and they never ask themselves a basic question. By the
Yeah.
way, which means that if you haven't thought about it, then whatever I feel is random. And a great communicator never leaves that to chance. You should know exactly what it is that you want me to feel at the end. If you just do those two things, tell me something about you that makes me want to believe you.
Mm-hmm.
Example after example after example that I've seen in real life. Or, and stop for a moment and go, what do you want the audience to feel? Right? Even if it's just audience of one. And engineer that into your chemistry, your power goes through the roof. Right? Because I tell people it's persuasion is like a ship with three masts, but only one sail is up. Argument for most people, actually for everybody. So let's lower argument, let's open character, let's open and watch the boat go farther and faster, and the poor argument still gets a little bit of a break because it's not doing all the work, right?
Yeah.
That's one. Now to the second question of how do you get better? Obviously, I think read my book, number one, but become a good critic is the better word. It's the best way to
Mm.
put it. Right. So when I coach somebody, I would say, I want you to keep a persuasion journal. So whenever you feel persuaded or that someone's trying to persuade you, I want you to write it down. Just make a note of it. What was it? Commercial? A movie? Right? A piece of art? A song? And ask yourself, did it work or did it not work? And if it worked, why? And if it didn't work, why? What did it fail? Right? What went wrong? For example, in movies, you have this thing between sentiment and emotion, right? So sentiment is fake emotion. It's not earned. So when a movie director kills the character at the end, dies from cancer, and you don't really care, but they hit you with all the strings, cue strings, right? And all this, everybody's crying. You go, I don't know, why is everybody upset? It's like it's a jerk. That's sentiment, right? When when your movie director takes you into someone's life and they die at the end, and you are genuinely sorry that they're dead, that's emotion. A Hallmark card, it comes with words. That's sentiment. You never give a Hallmark card without writing something in it.
Yeah.
Why? Because you don't want to give sentiment. You want to give emotion. What
Mm.
you write is emotion, hopefully. What comes printed is sentiment, right? So understanding these very basic things, if it's emotion, what do I want you to feel? And learning how to generate that emotion, which in most people's jobs, there are one or two things that are one or two emotions that make or break make the difference in someone's job. Understand what it is. If you want to be an inspiring leader, well, tell me what inspiration is. Well, you don't know. Inspiration is creation of desire. So it's persuading someone that they lack something. What do they lack? And how do they believe that you're the person who's going to fill that hole? It's Jerry Maguire, right? You complete me. So what do they lack? And how are you the person that completes them? Answer
Mm.
those two questions, you'll inspire all day long. You can't answer the questions, you're not going to inspire anybody.